So, welcome to another episode of JS Podcast. Today I have Brian. Brian is a 10-year, um, for the past 10 years, he's been connecting the US companies with Latin talent, basically Latin American talent. And he's the founder with 3 exits. He's a family guy and currently has his own podcast, Nearshore Cafe Podcast. So, Brian, welcome. And if you could just kind of elaborate a little bit on the introduction, that would be great.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity, Jerry. Really nice to be here. So I've spent about 20 years in business, but the last 10 as an entrepreneur and really focused on this world of Latin America. So that's really Mexico downward, the Caribbean. You go really far south to countries like Argentina and Chile. This is all Latin America, and it's uh, it's really interesting, because it's on our time zone. So, you don't have to go across an ocean and have crazy jet lag. It's, all in the same time zone as the States. So that's really where I've spent, 10 years in building companies in Latin America, supporting US businesses.
Okay. So maybe, given that that's what you're doing right now, maybe go back to when you were a lot younger. What were you like back then? What were your things that you liked to do, things you didn't like to do?
Yeah, it's funny. I've got 2 kids, and I think uh, I reflect a lot on like what I was like when I was their age, and and like their interest. So I've got a 6-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter. Um, and my son, I think, is has a lot of the same interests as me. I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois. Right in the middle of the country.
Hmm.
Um, Very stable childhood. My dad worked for the same company for 30 years. My mom, stayed at home, took care of the house and the family, and very like idyllic, Midwest childhood of backyard football and wiffle ball games and Cub Scouts and all that stuff. Um, and I had a real interest in like, I guess like the soft classes. And how I mean that is like you hear about the hard sciences and math,
Hmm.
like I was kind of mediocre at that stuff, like uh, math, science, all that. But I read a ton. I was kind of in that gifted section for like geography, for spelling, for reading, for creative writing. I was always really good at that stuff. And although I actually didn't get a passport, this is embarrassing when I say it. I didn't get my first passport till I was 28 years old. Um, so it was a lot of like, kind of a sheltered Midwest, and then I had like the last 15 years has been, just about as opposite as it gets. I spent a full year totally abroad, living out of a suitcase, no permanent address, and you know, did a degree in Singapore and lived in Argentina and ended up in Hawaii. But the early formative years, I had my interests, but didn't really left. I was pretty stuck in that Midwest world.
Would you say you were more kind of to yourself, or were you very outgoing during your high school years?
Uh, I would say more on the reserve side for sure. Um,
Hmm.
I had a few friends. I would never say I was one of the popular kids, but I did in the second half of my high school. I did track and cross country, stuff like that, more running. And then I played kind of like club basketball, type of stuff. So some sports. It was a big football school, but I didn't play on the football team, so maybe that was a miss. But all in all, it was a good high school experience.
Yeah, but you were on team sports, so you developed kind of like the teamwork, the
Yeah.
communication with other people, and things like that. So maybe tell us a little bit of how did you get into the whole outsourcing business and that.
Yeah, I spent my first 10 years in the talent world. So the first 5 was in Chicago. So I ended up, moving to the big city, Chicago, and, had an apartment. And I was supporting the biggest companies in America, and they had, thousands of openings. So I think what I learned about that is I could recruit from Chicago on a role in Texas, a role in Connecticut, a role in Florida. So you kind of learn the country pretty
Hmm.
quickly. And I like still to this day, if somebody says like, oh, it's a 213 area code, like I know what that is, or it's 860. I know where that is, right? um, but I also learned a lot about competition because you're in a race. So I think talent is often looked at in like two different ways. The way that I grew up on it, it was I need a good person today. And that's different from I need a perfect person tomorrow. So my first 5 years was in the I need a good person today world of IBM needs to hire 50 Java developers right away. So it's just this race to see who can get decent enough Java developers that are available that meet the budget, right?
Hmm.
And then I moved to California, and I spent the next 5 years as like a tech startup recruiter, eventually a head of talent. So I'm kind of like, here's the plan. Here's how we position ourselves against Google and Amazon that have unlimited budgets, right? Um, but that world was very much we'll wait and wait and wait until we get the perfect candidate,
Hmm.
right? Like there's no settling, there's no like we got to get this going because people at these early stage companies knew if you if you had a mishire, it's catastrophic. I mean, almost company killing, right?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to be Google and you lost 200 engineers this year. All right, it's okay. Well, we've got 20,000 of them.
Hmm.
But if you're an early stage company with maybe you raised $1 million or $2 million, not a ton of money, in the grand scheme of things, and you spend 3 months recruiting, you hire someone, they spend 3 months, and you're like, I think they might get it. I don't know. You give them a three more months chance. They're not getting it done, and then you're back to recruiting, and then it's another 3 months. Like that's a whole year you've lost.
Yeah.
Your competition, has surpassed you. It's so you learn a lot about not being afraid to dig deep to get the perfect person rather than send, a million profiles. It's much
Yeah.
more quality focused.
So I don't know if it was Bill Gates. Somebody said that your like top percent developer can outperform everybody else pretty much by like a factor of 10 or 20x or
That's right.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. There's this common about the 10x developer. And, and with AI now, sometimes they're talking about like the 100x developer. And you might hear of pay packages now that are like 8 figures. This is like professional athlete type stuff, like LeBron James, but they're paying data engineers and research engineers that build AI platforms because they add that much value to the company.
So what qualities in that kind of talent are you looking for when you're recruiting them? Like what is it just purely the skills as far as programming, the knowledge behind it? Is there like characteristics, their kind
Yeah,
of moral judgments? Like what are you looking for in that kind of a person?
yeah. A way that I try to separate from where people are in their career. Are you optimizing for scope or are you optimizing for scale? And those are two different things, and there's no wrong answer, by the way.
Hmm.
Because if you're optimizing for scope, it means you want big impact, big responsibility. You'll probably 10x your learnings. You're going to learn a ton. Um, lots of responsibility on your shoulders. You're probably working closely with the founders. You're really like vision driven. You're probably not going to optimize for cash compensation. You may optimize for equity type things like options and RSUs. And then the other side is the scale. So, typically it's higher salaries, maybe lower upside, but it's not just about money. If you were at a startup, um, and maybe you have like 2,000 users, right? So like you roll out your idea and it hits 2,000 people, okay. But let's say you roll out, like a shopping cart app or something, and you're at Amazon, all of a sudden, like hundreds of millions of people are using using something that you built. And you could, tell your mom like, hey, I made this, and like she can
Hmm.
see it, she can understand it. So there is this. You gotta understand where people are in their career. Are they looking? And often, um, they go back and forth, right? People like will go work at a startup for a couple of years because remember, it's a high rate of failure. So less than 10% of these are going to make it. So 90% of the people that work at these startups are going to struggle. Um, and they're worried about their paycheck. They're, worried about all sorts of stuff, but they're having a lot of fun. And then maybe they're in a phase of life where like they're getting pressure from their partner or spouse, like, hey, we need to we need to move out of our studio apartment. Like we got to get a house, or we have to send our kids to school or whatever. We got to grow up a little bit. So then they go scale for a while. But then they miss the fun, and then they go back to scope. So it's this kind of back and forth. And so the broader takeaway is recognizing that these are people, and they have things that they care about at different phases of their life. And so understanding where they are in their point in time of their life. And
Hmm.
that's usually the first question I'll ask them is, hey, so like, let's just be real here. Where do they catch you at this point in your life? What are you trying to optimize for? And I think people like that question because it helps them know that I see them as a person, not just filling a list of job responsibilities.
Hmm. Would you say that scope is similar or synonymous almost with startups, and then scale would be with big business?
Yeah, I think that there's always exceptions, but that should hold true.
Hmm. And then, so sounds like you've been working a lot in like South America as far as doing nearshoring. How does that work? Like, how do you even find people? You're not there physically right now, but how do
Yeah,
you get a
yeah,
hold of people?
yeah. So I spent that first 10 years in Chicago and California, and these last 10 years, so as a 20-year career, um, that first year ever working with Latin America, I moved there. I came home one day and told my wife, I think I've got this opportunity. I'm to be a founder. I'm raising money. I think it's going to come through. Um, but I don't just want to like run this thing virtually. That feels too risky. Like this is my reputation on the line. I want to move there. So we lived in Buenos Aires, for a year and got my hands dirty and all this stuff. Um, but as a result, I built a pretty decent network in that part of the world. And then part of that network is recruiters, leaders, operations people, engineering managers. And that starts to, like people know me, I have credibility, I'm a trusted person, not just this like random guy in Hawaii, like
Yeah.
they know me, people can vouch for me. Um, but today, I'm the founder of a company called Plug Technologies, which is closing in on having 100 people on our team that we basically bill out as consultants to our US clients. And that means we have an infrastructure of recruiters, an infrastructure of operational people that understand payroll and compliance and getting hardware in and out of these different countries and all the legal stuff like that.
So actually related to that, with the tariffs and everything else going on, how does that affect recruiting or having people work in the other country? Like, are there tariffs on that? Like, what is that all about?
Yeah, great question. So so far, the tariffs have been rather than regional, they've been country by country.
Hmm.
So the U.S., especially the Trump administration, is kind of like penalizing and rewarding individual countries rather than the region at large. So right now, there's you could look at tariffs as product companies and service companies. So product companies like Toyota, making cars, right? You'll actually have seen that. I mean, we sometimes like our memories don't catch up to the real situation. In the '80s, if you were in the U.S., it felt like Japan was just dominating us at every step, right? Like,
Hmm.
man, Toyota, Honda, like, and our Fords keep breaking down, and everyone wants to buy Hondas and Toyotas. And then, or Panasonic and Sony, and it's all quality. So what's actually been happening though over the last couple of decades is Mexico has become a dominant manufacturer for the auto industry. And the tariffs with Asia, they were never reciprocal until more recently. So Asian companies could charge, a huge amount, but America, wouldn't do a reciprocal tariff to, sell Fords and Chevys, in different parts of the world. Um, that doesn't totally impact our specific thing, which is software outsourcing, but it's coming, just not to Latin America. Now, as a result, we are the beneficiaries of a really nice tailwind because India is getting hammered right now. Um, what happened there is, and this is really interesting, just from like a geopolitics standpoint. You've got BRICS, the upcoming reserve currency, trying to battle the U.S. dollar. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then there's all these other countries kind of joining forces to make it stronger. So India is already kind of in the dark side, as part of BRICS. Um, in many cases, they've started to side with China, and the U.S. is taking notice. So in like a one-to-one battle, the U.S. is trying to penalize India. Not only with tariffs, but also the cost for getting a new H-1B visa. And
Hmm.
an H-1B visa is really a way for mostly technical people to, you know, come to the U.S. and they can work for, up to 7, 8 years, on this H-1B visa, right out of university, and, you get a sponsorship. And there's a whole lottery. I forgot the number now, but in the past it's been like 65,000 visas, every year, and a huge majority of those. So like what it was intended was for like the elite people to be able to work in the US. But what actually ended up happening is you have this like small number of people that are elite skills, and this huge number of people that are kind of average developers doing average work, right? Like quality assurance, integration, maintenance work. And companies need these people. But what's happening is, or what's been happening for decades, is these visas are going to Indian companies like Tata, Cognizant, um, some of the other ones, and they're so they're holding the visas. They're getting the arbitrage. They're paying these developers like 60K a year. They're billing them out at, it's like indentured servitude. They're sending them all across the country. It's really rough, and as a result, a lot of those jobs that would have gone to American developers or even American companies. So now it's being flipped, and India is being penalized for it. The cost of that new visa went from $3,000 to $100,000, just like a massive, massive increase. And how that's impacting is um, now really only like the big dogs like OpenAI and Google and Meta would pay 100K just to have the rights to get a great engineer. And this is what you were talking about earlier, Jerry. Like a 10x engineer is
Right.
worth that 100K placement fee. But you're not going to pay that for everybody, like the integration guys, the maintenance guys, the quality people. If you follow baseball, this is like, the posting fee you have to pay to negotiate with Shohei Ohtani, and get him to come from Japan. It's kind of like
Hmm.
the same thing. So you're not going to do that for everybody, just like the elite. So that's how that's flipping. Now, the last part of this statement, the work has to still be done. So who's going to do the work now?
Right.
The ship has kind of sailed for American engineers. Like they gave up on that work, 20 years ago. America's still producing like the engineers that work for the tech companies that are kind of pushing the envelope. And although I don't mean to be dismissive about the work, it's not like the elite work. It's just stuff that's got to get done. Maintenance
Hmm.
work, quality assurance, all that stuff. So the ship has sailed on American engineers doing that. It's too expensive now to import engineers from India and China. Um, and India kind of has this bad taste in its mouth right now. So all this work is starting to come to Latin America, and it's being nearshored. So the global outsourcing world is relatively flat, and like it's multi-billion dollars, but it's relatively flat. But what's changing now is India used to have a huge market share of global IT outsourcing. Theirs is shrinking while Latin America's is increasing. So more jobs are being outsourced, but now instead of Asia or to America on H-1B visas, it's being nearshored, and developers in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil are doing all that work.
Yeah. So when it comes to your customers or companies that are looking for talent, whether to hire like internally in US or just kind of near shore, what kind of companies do you see out there? I mean, like typically I can imagine mid-sized to big companies looking for talent. Do you ever work with or do you ever see small companies
Yeah,
who are just looking for like the one man guy that could do a lot of technical stuff? Yeah.
yeah. So what's been interesting is for a long time, development and like new companies went where the money went, right? Silicon Valley, US, like that's where the money is. That's where the VCs are. But you know what's been interesting in the last 10 years is Latin America is building a lot of their own companies. So they have
Mhm.
their own VCs. VC money from the US is going to Latin America. They've got their own little fintech companies. Um, you know, IoT companies, AI companies, and it's really cool to see. And if you're a company in the US that's like really pushing innovation, you typically don't want those integration engineers. You don't want to hire those guys as your first couple developers. You want to hire people that have had big scope and they've had to carry, um, carry development as like one of two people or three people on a small team,
Hmm.
really pushing innovation. And in the past, Latin America didn't have those people, but now they do. So it's actually really broadened it. To your point, your instinct was right in that 5 years ago, this was really a place for middle market and enterprise companies to swoop up talent, in big bulk capacity. But now startups are recognizing there's some really good elite style engineers, but rarely do you want to be the first guinea pig company for this person. Like, oh, this is a really good coder, but they
Hmm.
haven't really worked anywhere. But now you notice, like, oh, okay, they actually worked at their own startup. They've worked at a couple different like innovative small companies. So that risk profile is a lot lower. So you're not sacrificing time zone, you're not sacrificing quality, and you're getting the cost benefit.
So, what's a typical rate for this scope kind of a person?
Yeah. What there's kind of two worlds here. There's um there's like the dime a dozen, and I don't mean this negatively. There's just like a lot of Java developers, .NET people, QA people. So typically, if you're listening here and you're working with an agency, the agency's got to charge their markup, the cost to employ them, getting the hardware in. There's costs, that go into this. So they kind of build all this. It's not just the pay rate. But generally, you're going to have bill rates, in the 40 to $55 an hour range, right? Which comes out to like 6 to 9K every month, something like that. Um,
Okay.
Still a lot cheaper than hiring, say, in San Francisco. But what's happening is with those elite engineers that might cost 400K in San Francisco, you can get them in Brazil for $150,000, um, which is like, wow, $150,000. That's a huge salary for someone in Brazil. But you have to look at the arbitrage because nowadays, if you pay somebody 150 in San Francisco, that's kind of a mid-level person. So if you can get a elite, super senior person for the same price of a mid-level person, that's kind of the math you're doing all the time. Or if you can get a mid-level person would cost you 150K, which is like 15K a month, versus paying 8K a month. You're always trying to do like this kind of arbitrage, and just get maybe twice the value of what you're paying for it.
Hmm. So, as you mentioned, you founded like three different companies, and you've exited them. When you were founding, let's say the first company, what was your thought process in terms of how long you wanted to own that company? Was it going into it like, okay, this is going to be my legacy, or was it more like I want to build this thing up and then sell it?
Yeah, I didn't intend to sell it, and the company is still alive. I just sold my stake in it, and it was very much a personal reason. By then, I was settled here in Hawaii. Um, just had my first son, and I wanted to be there, And prior to that, I was on an airplane all the time, going to San Francisco, going to Argentina, and there's no easy way to travel from Hawaii to a place like Argentina. It's multiple days and you're just wiped. It's one thing to go from Dallas to Argentina. It's just a nonstop easy flight. But from Hawaii, you're going to California. Just Hawaii to California is 5.5 hours. And
Yeah.
California to Texas, it's just like a whole thing. So, and you're not going to do that for a 3-day trip, to see the team. You're going to be there for a week or two to make it worth it. So it became a calculus for me of it's just not worth it to be away from my family. So I didn't expect to do it, but I sold my shares. Um, but obviously have been very bullish in this world anyway. So I built two other companies. One leased recruiters from Latin America for U.S. companies hiring in the U.S., and the other is Plug, which I mentioned. So I think the future is Nearshore, and this is really where I want to be.
And so that second one, you've exited that one as well?
That one is still alive. I had several exit offers
Hmm.
for that one, several exit offers, and didn't quite go through. Some were like very heavy on stock, and that was a good move because their stocks, craters. Um, but the ones that I did exit, I was a department head for Lending Club in San Francisco, and that had the second biggest IPO in 2014 after Alibaba. And then I was on the executive team for a company called Soch, which was later acquired by Postmates, and then Postmates was acquired by Uber. So kind of in like a weird chain of custody, Uber. And then the third one was my very first nearshore company, which I founded and sold my shares.
Hmm. So you're living in Hawaii now. What circumstances kind of caused you to move there, or what active decisions you were making that you wanted to end up being in Hawaii?
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, the quality of life is a big draw. So if you can find a way to do it and do it with a remote work job, it certainly helps a lot. Um, but my wife and I didn't have kids yet, and we had this kind of whole year of living out of our suitcase, going everywhere. So we're like, well, we could end up anywhere. Where do you want to go? And I wanted to be in the States, and I thought maybe this would be like a 1 year chapter, because going from crazy travel and then being in Hawaii for a year, it's like a very easy place to transition. Because I think
Hmm.
Hawaii is the least American out of all the 50 states. It's like very heavy Asian. It's on an island. You're far away from stuff. We have almost nothing in common with a place like New York City, right?
Hmm.
So I thought, okay, like that could be a good year transition, but we liked it. We started to build our family, and I hope to be here forever.
Awesome. Have you talked to Mark over there, Mark Zuckerberg?
Uh, yeah, he's on a different island, but he's buying lots and lots of property.
Yeah. Um, so then, in terms of like from just a personal side, you mentioned you have a wife, two is it two boys or two girls,
One boy,
or
one girl.
one boy, one boy, girl? Um, what's life like for you now after? Um, I'm assuming you put in a lot of time into your companies before. Now you have a family. What's your life like now, as far as home life and then business life?
Yeah, I've kind of learned wisdom. Experience is the best teacher, right? So um, I really recognize the key in getting the right person to lead your business. And I think I have this ability now where I can like play every position, so I can fill in if something's lacking. Like if we need somebody to run marketing for a business, I'll jump in for a while. Um, I've kind of taught myself how to. I've up leveled myself quite a bit, with finance and accounting, so I can jump in there. I got to know enough to be dangerous with legal. I've taught myself sales, so I can play all these different positions. Um, but I think it's what I read this book a while ago, about how I didn't serve in the military, but I'm fascinated with the military and how they set up these structures. So generally, they have like a command officer, back at headquarters that can see the whole picture, and then they have the leader, in the trenches, on the mission, and you need both because that platoon leader or whoever's leading the troops, um, they know what's happening on the ground, but they often can't see the big picture. And um, I'm trying to be that kind of big picture commander to help help these companies see, are we on the right track? Is our strategy correct? Is our mission correct? Do we have enough capital? Um, so I also have a couple other companies that I started here in Hawaii. One is a cleaning business, the other is a locksmith company. So all these companies have their own operators, their own leaders that are kind of leading from the ground. And my job again is just to make sure that they have enough capital and the strategy is the right one.
Those, especially those two other companies, the cleaning and the locksmith companies, did you buy them already operating, or did you start them from zero?
Bought them operating.
Okay, so there were some people already in place that you were working with.
Yeah, and what I did is instead of buying it outright, I bought part. So it basically kept the original operator still there, which mitigated a lot of risk for me. So the cleaning company, my partner is the lead cleaner,
Hmm.
she owns part of the company. Um, the locksmith company, he owns part of the company. He's out in the field, changing locks and lockouts and things like that. And they both had I think they both didn't have experience with finance, with capital. It was kind of a hand to mouth, like I can't take on a big project because I can't wait 30 days to get paid, and we're
Hmm.
taking payment like cash in an envelope. It's very like small time. But they were both like really really motivated, smart people. They just needed a little bit of outside help. I'm not making a huge difference. They drive the business, but sometimes you just need a little bit of money and a little bit of strategy, and all of a sudden you make a big leap.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, I'm just kind of like thinking about other things I want to do and how potentially that would work as well.
Mhm.
What's because it's a partnership of sorts.
Mhm.
What's that like? Do you run into challenges? How do you overcome challenges with the partners?
Yeah, we try to have our lanes, like money and strategy are, where I tend to live, right? Um, uh, I've never cleaned a house, right? I haven't changed a lock. So like they do what they do, I do what I do. Um, but I try to use the phrase shared vision a lot. I heard that a few years ago, and I just make sure that me and my partner always have the same shared vision. And it's also the same with Plug. Plug has a full time president based in Atlanta who runs the whole operation. So when I wake up, the business can fully run without me. All three of these businesses can fully run without me. Um, so it also makes me want to up level. So whenever I'm like bothering them, it's to add value, not just
Hmm.
to, you know, keep them from doing what they're good at.
How would you describe, or how did you go from back when you started your first business, where you were everything, or you had certain people. But you mentioned funding, so maybe that was one of the answers of like getting enough people on board, so it could be in some sort of way a self-sufficient type of a business, not just relying on you. How did you go from like everything relying on you to now what you described, as far as the main operation of the business is not really relying on your day to day?
Yeah. Well, the capital part I think is important to say because I spent 5 years in San Francisco where no one seems to care about revenue. It's just kind of like a really funny place. It's a lot more like VCs are basically funding losses, um, and hopefully eventually it'll be worth a lot of money one day, right? That's kind of the ethos there. There's nowhere else like it in America, right? I came from the Midwest, and you got to make money. Like that's a key thing. So I've only worked for those software product companies. I've never founded one. So
Mhm.
my world is really services, whether it's recruiting services or nearshore services or locksmith services or cleaning services. I just know the services world, and the services world, um, you, me, I'm using my own money. Um, it's really to get it going, but then after that, you gotta, we're reinvesting profits to pay the team. We're not over expanding. We're not doing anything crazy. It's kind of incremental, 10-20% year over year growth. Not, we're gonna exit for $1 billion. So my goal is really to have a diverse portfolio of cash flow.
Mhm. Um, what else would you want to share with the audience about what you do, or about anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, the only other thing I would share is totally outside of this business stuff, but my wife and I are licensed foster parents. So our little girl actually started off as we got licensed. We took her in when she was 6 months old and fostered her for 2 years and then adopted her. And The world needs more foster parents. The country needs more foster parents. There's about 440,000 kids that are in the foster system. Um, and I never knew about this world. I didn't know anybody that was a foster parent, and my wife and I just kind of looked like, hey, I think we have the resources to try it. Let's do it. Um, and if there's anybody listening that uh, the impact you could have, kids, like, it's one thing to be an adult and you look at an adult, we can be judged on our decisions, but kids, they don't choose anything. It's all, they're all just kind of born into it, and there's some really really rough environments, some really bad environments. These kids just didn't pick, and the odds, like, I think 2 or 3% of them will go on to college. Over half will be incarcerated. Over half, sex trafficking, drugs, like just the worst of the worst, and nobody picked any of this, So if you want to make an impact, please check out becoming a foster parent.
Yeah, that's definitely a great message. How as far as the whole world, like, do you see more need of that in the U.S. or just worldwide in certain countries? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, certainly worldwide, it's a worldwide problem. But the U.S. is, I'm an American. The U.S. is, where we are. I did it in Hawaii, which is where we live, but every state has a lot of a lot of foster kids that just need support, and um, you know the impact would just be tremendous. So I really encourage anybody.
Yeah. Any links you want to leave, or
Oh
ways
yeah,
that people
thanks
can get a
Jerry.
hold of you?
Thanks Jerry. Yeah, Plug Technologies, PLUGG, and then the website there is plugg.tech, plug.tech.
Awesome, Brian. So thanks for sharing a little bit of your story, a little bit of what you do, and being on the podcast here. So
My
yeah,
pleasure. Really appreciate the conversation.